Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. What the government self does want in this is that as the we will just this religion will admit that there is a subjectivity in the theological assertions, right? Maybe they can admit it through the religious leader, but in the end of the day, this religion do admit this kind of subjectivity. So what do the government want to talk about? So we want to talk about how this religion in itself is subjective in individual level, and how by announcing this subjectivity we can lead to a more better world where the religion would be more relevant, and also how there will be a lot of benefits in the human perspective as well. So first about how this religion is subjective in the individual level itself. For religion is never the way religion is being interpreted is actually different based on each person, right? Because when we see the Bible, for example, we see the words of maybe like the certain verses, the way that rich people interpret Bible in a different is different than the way that poor people interpret. Maybe the verses may be like you have to donate each you have to always donate your money, a lot of your money, or most your money, right? Rich people would you should be donating towards the poor people. Rich people will be okay in donating, right? Maybe they will just go a lot of baksos and things and so on, and they say that it is a must for us as a human to donate and so on. But maybe poor people, they are barely hanging on. Maybe their money is barely in there, right? Maybe barely for them to survive, for them to eat. So maybe they interpreted that maybe we should donate to poor people, maybe just like giving in maybe in Moscow, maybe like this kind of box where there a lot of donation, maybe just give out some of money, a bit of money, and that's already part of donating to the poor people as well, right? But sometimes the act of the experience is different. Secondly, maybe the way that people perceive how this the right thing for God. But the thing is, they always perceive that this is already what God wants, right? But when our interpretation is different by experience and privilege, they also be manifested in different way. And when there's people saying the religion is just being that this is rigid, that there's no other interpretation, you need to do so, the people thinks that maybe the way they interpreted the Bible is not valid, right? Because maybe in the end of the day, they're not religious because they are through wrong interpretation, even though they're trying to gain some spiritual fulfillment. In the end of the day, they will feel not religious because their interpretation is not valid, and this impact as well, right? But when a lot of things happen when there's a lot this rigidity in the religion interpretation usually leads to people make feeling that this religion is not suitable, this religion is not good, this religion is not relevant to my life, that makes people leave the religion. But despite so, although if some critics might say that people is just not being religious again, he's not a fan of spiritual things, they are just, this is why they leave the religions. Actually, in the society, the means for the spiritual is actually quite high, right? Because you can see a lot of people maybe is always doing some kind of zodiac reading, maybe they are buying crystal to in order to feel some kind of spiritual energy to protect themselves. Maybe they can also do some kind of card reading, tarot card reading, and things, this kind of spiritual things, just still a lot happening in the society, right? There's a demand for that, but in the end, which means that actually the society is still demanding for spiritual, but the rigidity of the religion makes the compel these people to of making these people to leave the religion, right? But in the end of the day, even though we do not announce this religion will still be subjective. But what is the use of religions announcing this, right? As we already said that historically, religion is subjective, right? Religions keep developing according to the context and according to what happened in the status quo in this ordinary religious. For example, right, how we see that how Pope is talking about divorce is okay, and sometimes divorce is inevitable because there might be an abuse in the marriage, which means that people have no longer any reason to stay in the marriage, right? They say that it's okay to divorce. Well, in the verses of Bible, they say that divorce is something that God forbids, right? That's what the rigidity religious always convey. Maybe also they also convey that it's okay for to not sholat Jumatan when pandemic, right? When in reality that the religion have said that it needs to be done, right? But which means that it is subjective and according to the context, right? So despite that, even though there's a subjectivity that we already acknowledge and we said that also be announced, in the end of the day, the religions is the means for the people to reach God, right? So despite the means of maybe there's a different interpretation, in the end of the day, they will still reaching God in the sense of theological assertion, right? So if we want this religion to sustain, of course, we need to announce the subjectivity in this. And also, if we announce it, we will be included in discussion as well, because now they knew that there's a subjectivity of this interpretation. Some people might interpret it really, really really full of not that it's really, really bad in the sense like it can also harm other people. We know we can be included in discussion. We can include how to help and guide this people in interpreting this religion interpreting, maybe in the sense that it will be better in this context, how this will be a lot of relevance, a lot of give us spiritual fulfillment towards these people. Maybe now we can talk with the Pope about how this happens, and this is important because we want to make sure that we are still relevant as a religion and to the religion itself. And also, if we can now admit the subjectivity that this religions maybe the interpretation maybe is according to the human's mind, right? It's not about just the word of God that come from heaven, right? Now we can subject the religion under secular judgment as well. For example, like we can see that how there's a lot of big churches that look like they are liberal, but the small one, the locals ones, actually not that liberal. They always cannot be criticized because they are being protected in the barrier, in the umbrella that this is the God judgment. Now we can subject it towards humanitarian perspective of humanitarian values, humanitarian judgment as well. We can start to say, like, we can start to discuss, maybe God does not want us to be like this. Maybe this kind of interpretation doesn't suit what the God actually want. So this can help these people to prevent human abuse as well. Now, for example, the kind of small local one that still practice maybe like hurting and like rajam people that was being found to do some kind of adultery and so on. Now they can prevent human abuse, right? Because now they're more prone to discussion and also critics. Then it is also beneficial for the church to fix their image, because image is important towards church, as it also impacts how the followers feel towards the church. People that see that joins the religion, when the religion is being feel better, feel insecure and guilty, it feels like you are praying with some kind of mean people that only brought God's man in the doing evil things, right? And thirdly, we can also subject the religious leader into a criticism, because now we can talk about how this religious leader in there being protected under that this is what God's want. Maybe they are having jet and we are criticizing them, saying that it is more acceptable when there's a lot of poor people. Maybe you can sell that and donate the money. Now they can be criticized because it's no longer what God's want. And for all these reasons, we believe that it is better to propose.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister, for the speech. To open the case of side opposition or negative, may we call on the leader of UP. The floor is yours. Here.
Okay, thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, but can you try to speak one long sentence?
Hello, test. My name is Jeremiah from UI. Okay.
Yeah, clear.
Okay. If I get disconnected, please do tell me. Starting the speech in 3, 2, 1. Panels, I think that there needs to be an important distinguishment in this debate, because interpretation and subjectivity of theological assertions are two different kinds of things. Because how you interpret certain theological assertions is in your private right. That is to say that if you want to, for example, practice your religion differently, or if you want to see, for example, certain verses differently, and there's a community that supports your kinds of views, for example, it's fine for you to have that kind of community. But understand that theological assertions that we're talking about this debate, which they never established in their said house, like Bible, for example, Quran verses and whatnot, this is something that's different. Their said house has to define a situation where they have to admit that the creation, for example, of verses inside the Bible was inherently politicized. There were certain, for example, processes that include, for example, lobbying and whatnot to fit, for example, towards their political needs and whatnot. This is the kind of situation that they have to defend. I think that this is an important distinguishment to establish, because we think that under our side house, all the benefits that they want to have, like people want to, for example, practice religion in the ways that they want. They want religion, for example, to be progressive. Those kinds of things still can happen. But what we do not want is for the religions to admit, for example, that there were structural flaws inside of the Bible making that makes people, for example, less believe these kinds of religions. And in the end, I'm going to prove why this is harmful for religions, people inside religions, and the general society in of itself. What are we standing for in opposition? And how are we going to do this, right? We're going to simply say that whatever verse that is inside the Bible, Quran, Tripitaka, Veda, or whatnot, is what it is, and we're not going to respond, for example, towards any allegations that come out, because we say that it's something that's objective, and this is what directly comes out, for example, of Jesus Christ's mouth or of Muhammad's mouth and whatnot. Means that when we talk about objectivity and when we talk about subjectivity, that's proven to you before, you have to admit that there were political steps that were included in the making. But if you want to interpret certain verses differently under our side, this is something that's still open and people can still do this regardless under our side. But also understand that seeing Bible verses as something that's objective does not mean that you're going to pander upon it solely and make it, for example, the inherent moral compass on your life. You still can balance out with other norms that society have, practice it in your own ways, and you can help interpret it yourself. Moving on to my arguments, basically like one argument with all like the benefits I'm going to talk about in my speech. I'm going to talk about why consistency is something that's really important. Understand that religion, it's important for religion to be seen as something that's consistent. Why is this so? Because in the status quo, there's a trend that people are being disassociated with religion. They see religion as something that's too rigid, it's progressive and whatnot. And this in turn makes like people, for example, dissociate themselves from religion. There's two kinds of people that we need to care about in this debate. First are people who generally question religion because there's certain uncertainties that happen, that is the people in the gray area. But second are people who genuinely hate religion for being as it is, like people who do not like the concept of religion or do not support the concept of religion. Why is it then problematic when you admit, for example, that there was subjectivity? When you admit this, you admit that there's inconsistency that happens inside of your religion. You admit that there were several structural mistakes that were made in the process. How does this inconsistency and this admittance harm you and harm the the subjects that I talked about in this debate? First, to the people who genuinely hate religion, they can use these kinds of narratives and they can amplify this kind of hate and use this narrative or this fact to prove, for example, to the society that religion in of itself is inherently irrelevant. It's all lies. It's all made up by human beings. Like we shouldn't believe, for example, in the concept of religion. Understand that this harms the cause of religion because I've proven to you that there's detachment in society. This detachment is going to be worsened under our side, under their side, for example, when there's this kind of admittance with the narratives being easily twisted. But second, to the people that are in gray area, what is going to happen towards them, right? Either one, they're going to stay, for example, in their gray area, like, yeah, that's not a harm. But second, the harmful thing is if these people, for example, are swayed away with these kinds of narratives, at that point, the irrelevance of religion becomes more amplified. And in the end, you actually, make religion, for example, non-existent because now no one wants to practice it inside the status quo. It's no longer, for example, relevant. This makes religion less interesting. The relevance of religion becomes less. We think that this is harmful because religions can't maintain themselves and eventually, like there's a likelihood that people would disassociate religion. Why then this disassociation of religion, like dissolution of religion being gone, why then this is harmful? To three actors. First, religion practitioners, like for example, nuns, priests, or people that work, for example, in churches, mosques, and whatnot. These kinds of people have so much contributed or so much, for example, spared lots of things of their life for these kinds of religions. That is to say that, for example, nuns choose to not marry for the sake of religion. They've like devoted their life and they've already given a huge opportunity cost, for example, that they need to trade off. Understand the moment religion becomes irrelevant and religion, for example, dissolutes in the status quo, you create disenfranchisement towards them because you betray these people, for example, that have previously like sacrificed lots inside their life and puts them in a bad place, which is a harm that we do not want to happen under our set house. Second, towards general religious people that exist in status quo, understand that lots of people see religion as a way for them to, for example, something that really helps them. For example, you understand that you, for example, hinge certain uncertainties, and it's a worthy trade-off because, for example, you feel comfort and understand that you believe there's a higher power and whatnot. Understand the moment religion dissolutes and, for example, there's no more religion, these kinds of people are also harmed because they have also, for example, sacrificed lots, and they have, for example, committed their belief. But the moment it dissolutes, you make them and put also them in a bad place, make them feel, for example, useless and shameful. Even if, for example, they still believe in God, even if religion does not exist, they may feel, for example, shameful because now no one wants to, for example, connect with me. We do not want to put them in this position. But lastly, towards the general society, why this is something that's going to be harmful? Two reasons why. First, understand that religion is needed as a source of morality because religion makes people interact more amicably and better. Religion, for example, reinforces you to be kind, and like, for example, you have to, for example, say forgive your people, for example, that do wrongdoings towards you and whatnot. But we think that this is specifically harmful because the moment religion is no longer relevant and there's no more discussions about religion because now people do not like it, people are, for example, going to create more excuses, for example, for crime and for wrongdoings because now there's no standard of living and people are just going to live pragmatic lives. They're like, if I do certain actions, there's going to be a punishment, and people, for example, lose the concept of grasp of morality, which we think that this is an important factor that really regulates people's life and general people's life, regardless of not whether like they believe in religion or not in the everyday. Yes, prosecution can still exist under our side, but we think that having this benefit of morality is something that's better, and it's a benefit that we should co-opt, and that's why we think that this harm should be taken care of. The difference is, and how is this going to change under our side when you, for example, do not admit and you, for example, make this kind of like narrative or this kind of like perspective that religion is consistent, what is going to happen under our side of the house? We're ultimately going to make religion become still relevant because now there's no political power that sways, for example, like religion is no longer relevant and whatnot. In return, all the subjects that I've talked to you, nuns, priests, religious society, and the general society, they're going to be benefited under our side, and you feel and you make them feel in a safe place. That's why our side is very proud to post.
Thank you so much for the fine speech from leader of OP. To continue on the case of side government, we call on the Deputy Prime Minister. The floor is yours. Here.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1, directly responding to what opposition's leader of opposition's speech. I'm going to just go through all of their cases. First, when they talk about we still have a private right to interpret and practice in any certain way, we say that this is not enough in the status quo because people who interpret in a different way are overtaken by the masses and are invalidated when they do their practice. This looks like if you believe in a smaller sect of Islam and you, for example, do Ramadan on different time frame as others, you will be criticized and you are seen as different and therefore lesser than whatever the majority is. Second, they try to differentiate between theological assertions and interpretations, but if example I given before, that if they admit that the creation of some of these verses, if we have to admit that the creation of some of these verses were inherently political, one, that's not exclusive because on their side, people still criticize religion anyway. And second, if we don't admit that some of these religious teachings were wrong, rather than being disappointed because we switch our lanes, opposition world, people are disappointed because religion is staying rigid and does not want to change along with the time. So this freedom from criticism is not a benefit opposition can claim. So even if they want to say people in the status quo don't want to admit their beliefs because you're going to lose followers, not changing or admitting those faults, you're also actively losing followers anyway. Then they say that it is what it is. There's no response to the allegation, but you can still interpret. Again, you are stopped in practice. You can't pray on a different day if it's not accepted. If the mosques are not ready to handle people doing Idul Fitri in a different day, then obviously you're not able to do this. And even then, even if that's not it, even if it's a personal belief, you still feel individually suppressed in your belief since nobody preaches what you believe in their church or during your khutbah. You're not going to feel comfortable as someone who is LGBTQ or woman that in this religion, if nobody is willing to speak for you or allow your interpretation to flourish beyond just what you personally believe in. Directly responding to their case then, why are people, who are the people not in religion? They say that if we admit that there's inconsistencies, that there's several structural mistakes, again, not exclusive. The harm of criticism on opposition side will look like, oh, religion doesn't want to admit any of their faults, then they're no longer relevant. At least if we admit, we get all of the benefits that my prime minister set up. Second, when they say that it's going to create religion becoming less relevant, number one, that's not true. Varying interpretations can still maintain its popularity. For example, moderate Muslims are pretty much becoming more and more popular in Indonesia, for example, and even moderate Christians are somewhat popular in the US. Maybe not super popular, maybe not dominant, but at the very least, they're still maintaining themselves. And second, outside of that, we also already set up that spirituality is still being seeked out in the status quo. Look at my prime minister idea that people in the status quo believe in divine things, believe in a higher power by believing in things like horoscopes, tarot cards, etc. So there is a group of people that want spirituality. They just don't like religion because of its rigidity, its inability to move with the times, and the fact that it was created so long ago. Horoscopes are somewhat relatively new, or at least adapt to the times, so that's why they can get so much more followers. And with disenfranchisement, again, happens on up because you are being too rigid as well. The moderate Muslims that we already have in the status quo and are clinging onto will keep going away in droves if we don't try to admit them and their relevance. And the last point regarding religion is important to have because it will spiral down to if religion is no longer popular, it will spiral down to something bad. We totally admit this, but I'm going to integrate that with my case. So backing up my first speaker now on our positive case. Number one, by conception of religion, we already told you that is inherently subjective and that the common belief and what is accepted by society has always changed. How has that happened? For example, how people prayed back then versus how you pray now. It used to be 100. It used to be 100 rakaat. Now it's 5 because it's much more humane. How you're allowed or not allowed to leave the house as a woman. The parameter of that being you have to be with your husband, you have to be clothed up. Now it's going to be has been a lot more liberal and accepting. So different interpretations that are widely accepted has always happened. The definition of devotion, it used to be that you have to be sacrificed and tawakkal to the ends of the earth. Now simply having 5 prayers a day is the pillar to go to heaven. The relevance of deep conservative ideas already gone. Things like zina being punished via corporal punishment or torture is incredibly uncommon, and although it exists, it's not the majority subjectivity. So we say that this shows you that by conception, religion is okay with changing. By what followers feel. We already told you that invalidation is important and a strong basis to spread hate exists on their side because of this feeling of supremacy that your interpretation is the best. But quickly though, who are the religions that are still active in the status quo? The ones with a flexible but good moral compass, and we want to admit that our moral compass is flexible. These religious organizations that do comply to a sort of follower-based system that admit that the world will adapt and the world adapts, and so do they. This isn't to say that we seek an overwhelmingly secular community to convert, but we just want to gain some more conservative followers. Because again, number one, going back to the previous idea, there's already a demand for spirituality. We want to tap into that. Secondly, we open up the ability to discuss with religious leaders because now they can't just simply say whatever they say is the best interpretation. So people no longer see it as a rigid power structure, and that abuses done by religious leaders, pastors, and imams, we are able to then open discussion with them to say, hey, is this interpretation how is this interpretation? And even if you disagree, it's still acceptable and you're not going to be called out as haram or kafir at that point. So we say, even when it comes to depth of salvation, even if you lose devout followers, you still get liberation for the new followers. So we say there's no specific reason why we have to keep them around. If they say it's about loyalty, then on our side, we don't invalidate them. We validate all. It isn't like on our side, we say, oh, now your conservative interpretation is bad. No, we say your conservative interpretation is okay, and our more liberal interpretation is also okay. So moving on with that, and even at the very best case, where it's not the best for an individual religion's control over the institution, we are okay with treading some of an a religious organization popularity, because the motion is this house believes that the religious institutions should, rather than a as religious institutions motion. So it's not purely just what is good for what the religion's supremacy, but also how their followers feel and how other religions and how humanity feels in general. But let's move on directly to my quick extension. We say that conflict is inherent. A lot is derived from not admitting that there are many interpretations: Sunni versus Shia, NU versus Muhammadiyah, Old versus New Testament, Catholic versus Protestant. This is because they think they have the only way to interpret something and they are the most correct. It is just deeply important because people think that other people's practice affects them, either the belief that other people practicing it wrong will bring a disaster, or seen as a personal insult to your own way of practicing. In the ideal world, it should be fine on either side because people should be able to interpret however they want and be free. But let's engage with reality. When religion is seen as a communal thing, opposition allows it to manifest being harmful, where people think their interpretation is the only one that exists, and then a room of disagreement, a room to accept one another despite disagreements, does not exist. Government allows that to happen. By doing this, we are going to allow people to think that they can live side by side, rather than allowing a school of thought that supremacy or correcting others. So in Islam, you can have Ramadan start and end in 2 different time frames, all okay. In all religions, allowing women and admitting LGBT as part of the religion is that important. Is already given, my PM already gave examples of the Pope being more progressive anyway. So lastly, the ability to criticize, discuss, and get legitimacy. This is what I set up in my previous argument. This is also very important to make sure that other smaller religions can coexist and are not seen as a completely wrong interpretation of any sort of religion. For all those reasons, proud to propose.
Thank you so much, Deputy Prime Minister, for the speech. We call on the Deputy Leader of OP. The floor is yours. You're here.
Am I audible?
Audible.
Yep. Just setting up my timer and arranging my papers. All right. All right, cool. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think government mischaracterizes the motion because they never prove to you then the step-by-step analysis. They take for granted the idea discussion will automatically happen if there is different factions and different ideas of religion. And the examples that they bring is Sunni and Shia, for example, which was questionable, right? Because if religion, something that all houses concede, that is very personal, that affects how they view their worldview and everything, and other things that are not part of the religion is considered as sinful and haram or kafir or whatever, wouldn't then different kind of subjective interpretation that is not based on a higher power, but based on politicized content of each individual, means there is more incentive for each religion and each faction of interpretation, subjective interpretation of religion, to fight each other, to create a more conflict religion, to ensure to also have more conflict, exactly because they're going to call each other haram, for example, and create more concerns. So the question for government then, why is discussion an automatic thing that happens on your side? Or even why is it likely, for example, assuming the characterization of religion you also admit as something that's very personal? 3 things I'm going to do, right? First, why objectivity is an effective method of spreading message, and only when through objectivity we can allow better spreadability of institutions' messages. Secondly, why religion is no longer, when religion is no longer objective, why it's bad for our actors. But 3, why subjective theological assertions harms the vulnerable. First things first, right? Objectivity is why it's an effective method. So we claim to you criticism will happen. Goff says criticism will happen anyway, and on our side, suddenly religion will separate and disintegrate and weaker power, right? No. So 2 things. 1, religion institution is powerful because critics have always consistently happened since the dawn of time, right? But why religion still remains strong and powerful? Because the institution posits this is not something that man created. This is something that God created, something that comes from a higher power that we can't question. That's why they use strategies like faith, for example, ensuring that you are constantly, you just need to be faithful even though you don't understand it and whatever. This means when you make it subjective, we admit there is religious politicization, it allows the criticism to necessarily happen worse, because now you can pinpoint the creator of that particular verses, for example, and analyze what are the interests and whatever. It makes people less likely to want to believe in the religion and less likely for the message to spread, because now people think that, oh, it's man-made, so I don't have to believe in it. But secondly, it's also better when the religious institution created, because religious institution is the most trusted actor and stakeholder that religious people listen to. They're the ones who are the beacon of light and the ray of hope and the way to the heaven, for example, those who understand the scripture. So it's different than if you admit that you fucked up in the past. It would more likely make religious people question you and less likely to believe in religion anyway, because they feel like they've been lied to and everything. So you can only spread your message well, and the benefit of government, of better control of the people, can only happen when it's objective. That's why RT should win. Second, why religion is only, is no longer objective, why it's bad for our protectioners, right? So nuns and priests and people who believe God, they believe God because they believe it is a thing that comes from Jesus's mouth, for example. Different than when the religion comes from, politics and everything, and it is said that it is politicized and everything. It's bad because the harm then is that, one, people question the choice that they have because they thought they praised God before, but now they feel like religion lied to them, which creates which at best creates kind of opposition to religion, which looks like, for example, lots of kafirs, for lots of people who don't believe, fighting, for example, directly against religion as a whole, questioning its credibility and need, for example, knowing now it's created by a bigger power, it's created by people, not by a bigger power that they thought to have existed, but which is harmful because now you can't do any kind of credibility, impact, or campaign that you want to talk about. But secondly, it's also bad because most of the time then, it makes people do not want to engage to religion. It makes any kind of society control that you want then to less likely want to manifest, for example, because people no longer want to engage that particular thing anyway. So not only discussion is slower that you want to manifest, religion doesn't even have its followers to create any kind of discussion with. So all in all, worst manifestation on Gov. Let's talk about my extension, right? Why selective theological assertion creates confusion and makes religion inaccessible for the vulnerable. 3 impacts. Firstly, explain first, right? What happens in Gov? In Gov, a religion like Christian is now separated to many, many different sections. One interprets Jesus' relationship with wealth. Second, emphasizes on Jesus as a Lenin Marxist, person who is anti-wealth, for example. So the religion understanding is different and usually oppositional to each other, and only happens when there is no bigger power of institution to direct and decide which one is good or which one should be the majority belief, for example. This is bad on 3 levels. One, it's bad because it's inaccessible. For you to join, you need to not just believe in Jesus, but whether your belief in Jesus is contextualized to the core belief of the particular idea, for example. So don't just imagine it's moderate, progressive, and conservative, but it's Jesus doing X is the most important thing, or Jesus doing Y is the most important thing. Because every religion is deemed as subjective and valid, there is bigger scale of people who wants to, bigger factions and streams of religion. This is bad because imagine if you're a single mother of 3 in India who needs to find solace in a higher power, for example. Not only do you not have the time to scrutinize each faction, you are now needed and deep and stressed, for example, to learn first, not just how Jesus is good to you, but what specific way is Jesus good, or how is this belief fit for you and not fit for our enemy, for example. This is bad because now religion needs to be intellectual and it needs higher access for people and not good for people who are poor, uneducated, and minority. Second, why it creates better communality and each other. Why it creates better communality. First, I think it creates better communality because usually when there's an objective metrics, when it's the same, for example, for everyone, then it creates uniformity for the majority of religious people because religious institution, the ones they care about, tells them so. It creates a sense of reliability and comrade to each other, for example, because they feel and they believe in one thing. It pushes for a creation of community, which is good on two levels. One, it gives people a sense of purpose because now there's other people they can be with, reducing, loneliness and everything. But second, it's easier accessibility for community because now Christians, people who go to city A, are able to find community easier. The comparative is on Gov, it's harder because subjectivity means there is more communities who are smaller and separated. It's hard for you to find factions, hard for you to find relatability, but it's hard for people who comes in geographic minority to access these kinds of help. But lastly, religious factions on Gov is going to be fighting with each other because most of the time there is no bigger power to order them, right? They want to gain as many power as possible. They want to spread then the hate and the idea that other place is haram, for example. Don't fall into that, which most likely create religious battlefield that makes it even harder for people to believe in one thing because there's so many different messages confusing, but also it makes religion to be unethical and unappealable because, well, they're fighting with each other most likely, which creates the message of peace to be distorted. But minority, right? Sure, they claim that there is kind of battlefield and discussion, but how, right? No explanation as to why the different beliefs, which one might be conservative and what might be progressive, can discuss with each other regarding why minority accepted. It's better on our side because everyone is part of the religion. Progressive Catholics can push for Pope to believe in, to listen why LGBT needs to be accepted and everything. So it's better initiative for discussion in the first place. Proud to oppose.
Thank you so much for the speech, the Deputy Leader of OP, to close the substantive case of side government. We call on the government whip. The floor is yours. Here.
Check. I'm audible.
Yes, you're audible, Ka.
Okay. Go then. Starting my speech. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. If the way you want to maintain relevance in this world is through manipulations, is through lies, is through hiding your wrongdoings, is through hiding your true nature, we say you don't deserve to be relevant in this world. 3, this is how I'm going to answer any concerns coming from negative side of the house, right? First of all, let's talk about their subjective interpretation that each factions will fight each others and so on and so forth, right? Look, with or without, I think with or without us and announcing this, they will fight anyway. But let me portray to you this. What happened under our side, the delta is simple. At least under our side of the house, there are no imbalance of power. There are no, first, there are no imbalance of power because sometimes the reason why the fight becomes dirty and very, very bad, it's because certain religions claim higher superiority, claims ownership of the truth. This is why, because they claim like, oh, I own the Bible and this is the objective reality of the Bible and so on and so on, right? Everyone is equally subjective means the fight between each other, the mockery between each factions will be between humans and nobody will hide behind the veils, behind the barriers of moral objectivity, of objective truth to which the religion currently claims, right? That's why the nuance of criticism that Delphi and Batara tries to push to you is that will criticism exist or not, but what kind of criticisms that will be there? Because the moment you lift up the moral superiority, the objectivity of the Bible, that's the moment humans are subject to the criticism and nobody can hide it. So yeah, we say if they want to say, oh, no social control and so on and so forth, we say to some extent the trade-off is simple. Anarchic society is much better than the one controlled by the objective truth. Because the way anarchic society, look, the way society operates is it's just coincidentally that religion is the one that came up first, right? And hence people communally flock around religion and they start shaping moral rules, moral judgments around that, right? In alternate universe, it could be anything. What is the take here? Even in the absence of relevance of religion, the communal rules, the moral rules will still be there. And to some extent, it's much better because the moral rules that are created, that are being discussed, are based on human value, and nobody can claims behind more objective truth that are untouchable by human criticism, for example. That's number one. So yeah, number two, let's put this aside because we find this quite unimpactful. Let's talk about the practitioners and so on and so forth. Look, um, they concerns about the nuns, the devotees. What if people question their choice? First of all, even right now, if I say Andree will go to a seminary school and become pastors, everybody will question my choice anyway. Look, they don't care about the questions from the people. If you're nuns or devotees, what you care about is your relationship with your perceived God, right? They will be devout anyway because faith does not come from the objectivity of the verses. Faith comes naturally. Faith is a blessing that they have that suddenly they can believe. But to some extent, for these nuns, it can be much better because now they can pass the test of faith. Because regardless of the objectivity of the objective truth of the paper you have called Bible, regardless of what people criticize against you can still be devout. And that is where a better devout nuns, a better spiritual journey for these nuns and devotees, a better spiritual fulfillment can be achieved. So yeah, put that aside. Number two, let's talk about the atheists will use this and amplify the hate against religion. Atheists, anti-theists are literally the one person you cannot bear, right? Literally, they will hate religions regardless. I'm not sure what the delta is, but regardless of what we said, the take here is simple. Atheists can say whatever they want in their echo chamber. Most of followers, most of devotees usually have their own echo chamber as well, where they really don't pay much attention as long as they have that spiritual fulfillment, right? I think on that sense, we don't get the harms coming from being criticized by atheists. If that is a harm, I think for far too long, religion will be no longer relevant, right? Religion as source of morality. Three layers. First of all, it's dangerous if you rely on this, right? Because it is immune to criticism. But number two, in the absence of religion, morality can also be shaped. I have explained to you this earlier. Number three, it can be shaped better because religion can be put under criticism as well. Number four, religion do not shape morality. Okay, so yeah, the rigidity of interpretations comes immediately from the belief that their Bible is one objective source of truth. This is something Batara has explained to you. I think Elgard fails to respond to this. We expected Kezia to respond on this, right? Because like objectivity of the verses are currently being, if they want to accuse us of being political, then the political is to some extent is symmetrical and it's much worse under their side of the house. Objectivity of this truth, first of all, right? When they said the assertions are objective, which one? Because even Bibles contains contradictions, right? And this is where it becomes dangerous. Objectivity of verses becomes utilized by certain religious leaders to actually justify discriminations against, for example, Islam against Ahmadiyya, for example, or Christians against Jehovah Witness, for example. It manifests into real life bullying. It manifests into real life discrimination, and it is being justified. That's why in engagements, they said they want organized religions that can interpret religion for them, right? I think the trade-off is simple. This is the same hierarchical structure that creates discrimination. We are okay that religion no longer have those grasp of control over what people should believe, right? I think that creates healthier relationship between individuals and religions, where individuals can have better spiritual fulfillment, better spiritual journey through their own their own exploratory rate when they said, but their concern is here's religion becomes more intellectual property, for example. But look, just because we announce that religion is subjective now, does not mean pastors, intellectual scholars, communities will be disappearing, right? There will still be discussions, there will still be guidance from scholars to actually discuss this with you. The difference is they no longer have claims over the objective truth. Number three, they talk about community, camaraderie. Look, internet exists. It's much easier than ever to actually find like-minded individual and have communal connections, right? The fact that we are not in the same chamber and we can still have discussions like this. What's stopping religious individuals to have those discussions as well? The take is simple. We are more than happy to take whatever harms it is because the absence of those objective truths are much better in this world. We oppose.
Thank you so much, Gofwip, for the speech. Before we start to upwip, gue izin ke toilet dulu ya, just like 1 minute, is it okay?
Okay.
Test. For upwip, you're free to start your speech. The floor is yours. Here.
Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The spirit of the debate and what the wording of the motion demands is about whether or not we're going to admit. We should not be debating about whether or not it exists in the very first place, but whether or not that admitting will bring extra benefits or not, right? The reason why this debate has become very confusing was because there's a lack of setup of what is constitutes as theological, like these narratives and so on and so forth, right? What's included in it and what's not inside of it, right? I think that this has been done wonderfully by my first speaker talking about how this is going to talk about the Holy Scriptures, this is going to talk about the extra Bibles that came up eventually, but this does not talk about the interpretation. Because if people question the source in which this came in the very first place regarding whether or not this is subjective, people are not going to debate regarding whether or not this scripture is beneficial for us in the current status quo, but whether or not this scripture is true in the very first place, right? But in understanding that, the reason why Elgard's arguments become very important is that it takes too much energy and resources, right? You have to research the historical context of the time. If possible, you have to go visit that place and understand what the people, the locals believe and how then you best interpret it and use it into your normal language. And third of all, regarding how doing all this requires a lot of privilege, a lot of money, and a lot of time for you to even do it at all, right? What we're trying to say is that people is just not going to engage in religion at all, right? Because it now becomes something that's super complicated and there's no certainty of it, right? Regarding why we admit, and the important part is regarding how people only want to believe if they believe that there's a greater good. There's a certainty that you're going to go to heaven, that there's a certainty, there's a grand prize for you in this afterlife, right? The objectivity and the constant rigidness that there is a faith above what's being seen and above what is written is exactly why then it becomes important, right? I think that by then, all the arguments regarding interpretation and fights, you can reevaluate whether or not they really manage to prove the likelihood, right? So I'm going to move on to the other parts. First of all, regarding how then you best achieve a more communal religion and like just tackling those specific points, right? So first of all, what did they try to say? They try to say regarding how, the conflicts are inevitable, but at least it's going to be less harmful, the mobs, and regarding how they allow people to think side by side, Christian Protestants and Christian Catholics, right? Wrong. Different interpretations cannot happen, and these people will not coexist. Why is this that? Because they never characterize to you the likelihood of people accepting that. Human nature is for the pursuit of truth, and inherently in the current status quo, we believe that the nature of truth is that it is singular. It cannot coexist with another truth if it has the very exact same premise, right? That's the reason why in Catholic and Protestant, they have very specific statements, but have very different opinions on it, right? They worship whether or not they worship three different entities, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, or whether or not they're just one entity and we should just worship them the same, right? The difference in that opinion leads to people like constantly having this discourse, and it becomes even worse, right? Because on their side of the house, they're not only going to attack how people like are exercising their beliefs in the current status quo, but they're going to attack the very nature, right? They're going to ridicule by saying you're just a fool because you're believing something that was written by humans, something that was politicized, and so on and so forth. This kind of constant sneering between each other, we think is much worse, right? Because what happens in their side of the house, where they want to claim, oh, we let each other coexist, means that they're not. They do agree that empowering one religion means that you are going to deny the other. But otherwise, if they don't empower any of these religions, it's going to be a very inconsistent and randomly updated claims on how the Bible actually is, right? The reason why this is bad is threefold. One, people don't feel empowered and secure. We told you regarding how, for example, people feel secure when they know that religion is for sure, it's objective, it's something that definitely came from God, regardless of whether or not this is actually true. This actually brings people comfort, and it's important for their mental health because something needs to be a constant in their lives, right? Second, people don't feel the communal aspect, right? Because there will be no urgency to unionize, right? Exactly. When they try to tell you that, oh, these people are normalized to having multiple different interpretations, that means that there is no urgency and there is no incentive for people on the higher ups, people with the most influence within the countries and within the world, to want to listen to people from different minorities and listen to their opinions, right? Because now people can just simply do it on their own. There's no communal. That means that the comfort that you know that you're not alone in this world, that you have a community you can fall back on, those purposes of religion is no longer executed on their side of the house. But lastly, right, when you think about it, their world, if it's very inconsistent and recently updated claims, oh, look, we found out that this is true, and probably that means that in the past this was super subjective, and so on and so forth, means that it's going to be a very tiring process, as has been clarified before, right? That means in two results. One, people are going to become even more invested because their entire ego hangs on whether or not their own interpretation of it is true. Egoistic people will become much worse on their side of the house, where they feel like they need to put aside their jobs and everything for the sake of their own interpretation of the religion. But second, people are just going to disassociate entirely, right? Which is bad because religion serves purposes that the law and other norms in society do not believe, regarding how kindness, that even when they go unpaid or crimes that are unpunished, are still something that's bad and people are not allowed to do, right? But second, in terms of criticism towards like religious leaders, right? Is it that impossible? Because in the current status quo, you see like Catholic people complaining about what the Pope do all the time. When you see like a recent ulama doing things that are saying controversial stuff, you see people complaining all the time, right? Technically, I think there's a difference between the Holy Scripture that was mentioned and in the like wording of the motion, like God's word, versus structural guidelines and regulations that decides how many popes reside over a certain area, how long you have to practice, and all these things. Because these do not came directly from God's words, right? These are something that's like people try to interpret and people try to negotiate how this is best for this local area, and then it goes to national. What I'm trying to say is that this is something that's negotiable, something that can change over time. This is not the part that we are discussing. But rigidity is something that people actually enjoy, right? Even when they give the example to you regarding how they have tarots and crystals, if you know anyone who does tarots and crystals, you know that it is super rigid, right? Because you have a rule, so you have to willingly subject yourself to. For example, one, you cannot do tarot by yourself. It has to be read by someone else. Two, in terms of crystals, you have to understand that there are scientific components that allow you to not hold a crystal for too long. Otherwise, you're actually going to become physically sick, and so on and so forth. In a world where barely anything is within our control, like what happens to you, your job, your family, your loved ones, rigidity gives you a sort of safety and security because there is certainty. There's predictability, and it gives you room to breathe and react, right? So even in the very worst case where it's very rigid, it's okay because people do enjoy it. Even when they go to tarot or crystal healings and so on and so forth, we're fine with that because that's just another form of religion, right? We don't see why then it's going to be an issue. There's not a clear delta on their seventh house. But lastly, right, when they try to argue to you regarding why then they want people to like feel like they're not individually alone on this world and so on and so forth, right? Understand this. When people have the same thing as intuition, and the reason why we're able to win debates by like which part is more intuitive, which part is like elaborated better, means that even on their side of the house where they have multiple interpretations, multiple people are more likely to follow in the same thing, right? And this coupled with the urgency to prove that your like religion and your interpretation of what is subjective is right regarding how it changes all the time on their side of the house means that it's going to become even worse, right? Because then what's going to happen is that majority has more incentive to push minority to the bottom, right? Because now they want to prove that what subjective is right, and any other claims regarding how then, for example, this must be objective, this must be something that's right and something that must be executed by everyone else, is going to be shut down by these members, right? So I don't see the delta regarding why then like Muslim who are Sunni or Shia are going to be able to coexist with each other. All in all, I encourage you to look at your notes and check the likelihood of each argument.
Thank you so much, Upwip, for the speech. To close the entire case of Upbench, we go on the Upliplier. The floor is yours. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Try to speak louder, a little bit louder. I think it's just my connection.
My name is Elgard. Am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Cool. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. The way I'm going to assess this massive debate is going to talk about which policy creates better religious institution. Secondly, which one impacts the different actors we talk about, like the vulnerable people and the community and everything, right? So first clash first, does it create better religious institution? So both sides concede that religion is important, right? But the analysis on which you need to buy this clash needs to talk about which one then is able to manifest and create better likelihood, for example, on certain benefit manifesting on certain actors behaving certain way. Goff says, oh, better tolerance because people won't call each other, kafir anymore because everyone's belief is suddenly valid. Secondly, people are still going to believe in the religion anyway because there's blind faith and everything. But thirdly, they talk about a minor point on why religion then needs to become more relevant to be accordance with the times. What did we respond in opposition? 3 things. Subjectivity is bad because it harms those who already practice religion, like nuns and everything, because they think they believed in God. But now when we admit, like previously we didn't, but now we do it, we admit that religion is created by politics, it makes them feel betrayed, right? That their opportunities is lost, for example, because of something that man created, not God that they like. It creates opposition towards any kinds of religion, creating a comparative harm to Goff, which Goff never expanded to because they claim that there is faith, which in analysis level does not explain why they would necessarily behave that way. Second, we talk about religious people is harmed in 3 ways. Followers are harmed because 1, it creates a worse condition of infighting between religion, creating objectivity. Objectivity is the reason why people are, for example, living in order and everything, which necessarily is not negated by government, or which government only says that, it's not a bad condition because because people are still gonna feel like they can tolerate each other, but no explanation as to why people will do that. But secondly, why people are so nice. They're acting in a very best case scenario that is unbelievable because the comparative is that we engage even if they're nice, for example, why it's still hard for people to access the religion anyway. But the worst case, we analyze that it's not going to be as good as they say. It's going to be infighting. many religions claiming the other religion is bad, which results into less people joining religion, which results into less people being good and following gaining the religion's benefit. But lastly, we talk about who is the most, we talk about vulnerable people, right? The biggest point that Goff wants to champion about minority people and everything. We questioned then that the minority point they talk about can only manifest when there is incentive to discuss, right? That people need to discuss with each other from between factions of religion. But they never claim to you and picturize why the discussion would happen if each faction, which we characterize, already have oppositional value, exactly why they don't join together, because they have different political interests and different incentives, creating, for example, more incentive to fight each other. Comparatively, we explained in the early speakers that discussion happens better when we are objective, because then the interpretation, which is different from the religious assets and everything, happens better because there is incentive for everyone to be heard, because there's incentive to have unity. Everyone then needs to talk with each other, for example, to interpret the asset well, the objective asset well, and how it looks like. So how you should debate, you should analyze then the whole thing based on two metrics, right? One, likelihood, because we prove better to you how we are able to retain followers and make it perceive like we are doing a good job at it, because the comparative is betrayal and infighting, and proves to you why people are likely to behave the way we told them to be. Where in Gov, they take for granted things like faith, take for granted things like people discussing with each other with no contextualization. But secondly, better characterization on our side, because we actually display how actors behave and what are the reasons why they do that. Well, in Gov, they act as if religion is just this one big organization that is separated with no nuance. So I think you need, it's more believable on op proud of.
Thank you so much, Up Reply, for the speech to close this entire debate and finish the prelims of IVED. We will go on the government reply. The floor is yours. Here.
Okay, just check. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. I'm going to be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. One nuance that needs to be really important here is that government allows for a room for disagreement. Opposition says there is no incentive to discuss well on government side of the house. But number one, opposition admits that there's inherent to discuss regardless, because you want supremacy to an extent. But uniquely what happens on government side of the house is that you no longer have the incentive to prove you are the best out there, because we allow religions to disagree. The idea that subjectivity exists and that multiple of you can exist, and that supremacy isn't the end all be all. My GovWeb especially clarified this by saying that no matter who came first, who owns the Bible, there is no incentive in fighting. On our side of the house, we imagine a world where religions are more passive between one another, but still devout in their own practices. Two metrics for this debate. Number one, is admitting subjectivity principally coherent for religions to do? Secondly, what does admitting the subjectivity lead to? Crucial problems with opponents' case. I'm just going to go through them here. Number one, they say that admitting problems is admitting a lack of credibility, and it's going to give an interpretation that it's by the people and it's not attractive for followers. We already gave you so many attempts to show that spirituality in general is still going to be there and is still going to be attractive regardless. Here, I think opposition finally gave a response in their whip, saying that horoscopes and other things, they still have some form of rigidity. But we already preempted that by saying the other aspect of religion that is so hated is because it's rigid and it's super old, made by previous generation. Horoscopes and all those other things were at least based on modern concepts, so we want to follow along in these newer forms of spirituality. And at worst, it is absolutely parallel, because the perception that it's old morality means that the next generations cannot adopt it and it is lost to time. Second, their idea regarding spirituality of the nuns and priests and their veracity in how they share their teachings, all right? Number one, we tell you that they still have the ability to say whatever they want in their sect. We simply add different nuns and priests with different interpretations. I get that we lose the aspect of absolute and God-made aspect of religion, but we've already told you how this is not the end-all be-all of this debate, and that God's command, we told you that it's based on our side of the house. Our interpretations are still based on religious texts and theological assertions that were already there, and that these different interpretations are not entirely man-made or political on our side. Even when it was political, we already engaged with this. telling you that opposition have to admit, and they did admit, that there are some aspects of the religion that were politically made in the past. But the problem is opposition cements that doubt on religion, cements those politically made teachings that were made in the past, still staying in the religion and are unable to move from it. Because even if you don't admit it, those political aspects are still there from the previous generations, actively keeping out the newer generations. If they say that government is taking the best case of no infighting, opposition is reliant on the best case of how rigidity and old morality being relevant to all followers and all future followers. Thirdly, on the idea of confusion, we responded to this by saying that if they say it's inaccessible for vulnerables who cannot learn everything, one, on our side, we told you, even if you know the religion, it's still inaccessible because your personal interpretation is shut down. So opposition carries the harm of inaccessibility. Second, we never give you the burden to learn everything. We already told you that you just need to learn their own interpretation. We explain how your views just needs to relate to you and are not shut down. Fourth, the sense of purpose, we told you it's not suddenly gone. Look at the status quo and the context we gave, that there's still several interpretations that can survive, and we need to lean onto allowing interpretations to exist rather than staying stuck in one interpretation. What did we bring that was really important? Number one, that nuance of allowing room for disagreement. So we are allowing people to not engage with one another, and that even if the discussions don't happen, that's fine. They can coexist with no incentive to directly attack one another. And so why we should win this debate is, number one, we contextualize religion throughout time and its natural evolution. Subjectivity is always there. Number two, we engage with Ops' problem of losing consistency. And number three, we already engage in the nuclear worst case by explaining that sources of new followers are there, while opposition hasn't explained what has and is happening if you stay overly rigid and don't want to change at all. Very glad to end the prelims of this IVED and what was a very interesting debate.